great Barack Obama, the hero of the left, the hero of the Democratic Party, the man who gets up and speaks, oh my God, Black Jesus is in the house today, right? He goes and campaigns, and this is the worst loss of his career, my opinion. This is what I think. Worst loss of his, I think the worst night of his life was November 5th, November 6th, midnight. Worst day of his career. Horrible. You're seeing right now speculation with him, Jennifer Aniston. His wife wasn't at the Jimmy Carter, funeral.
The story of a leader who inspired enormous expectations but delivered far less has become one of the most striking political case studies of our time. Built on memorable speeches and a favorable media narrative, the image seemed unshakable until critics began to challenge it. That's where Patrick Bet-David and JD Vance step in, dismantling the polished exterior to argue that Barack Obama's legacy was built more on presentation than lasting results.
But think, you're Obama, okay? First go from the Obama's lens. Okay. Obamas are sitting there having to hear people compare Kamala to Obama. Crazy. Do you know what that does to Obama? Do you know Obama is sitting there saying, shut the, that's what Obama's saying internally, right?
First of all, I don't believe whether you agree with me or disagree with me, whether you agree with Donald Trump or disagree with him, I don't believe in hectoring voters. I believe in persuading voters. Your support is not something I'm given or something I'm owed. It's something you got to go out there and work for. So one, I just don't like the tone of going in. I mean, look, the better question for Barack Obama or anybody to ask is not why black men. It's not how dare you not vote for Kamala Harris. It's maybe they're thinking about voting for Donald Trump because they're sick of being censored. They're sick of being.
Patrick Bet-David wastes no time breaking down what he sees as the gap between words and outcomes. While Obama's speeches often inspired, Bet-David argues that the results during his presidency told a different story. Military conflicts continued, economic pressures on the middle class persisted, and the deep political divisions he pledged to heal only widened. Bet-David frames it as a familiar political pattern: offer hope, deliver minimal change, and rely on strong communication skills to maintain support despite limited progress.
Like, go back to it. You can do that. We don't have to agree politically. I still want to find a way for us to be able to hear each other out and disagree on policies, and I want to see them be together. I don't root for them to not make it. You want to see them make it. However, body language, these guys haven't been living together for a long time. I mean, when he's going and having breakfast with his girls and the wife is not there and he's going to funerals and traditional presidential, things that you have to be part of, and she's not there at Jimmy Carter's funeral. Maybe not Trump's, I get it, but Carter's.
JD Vance adds to the critique by focusing on the perception of Obama as a transformational figure. He argues that, rather than reshaping the nation in a lasting way, Obama's presidency shifted the Democratic Party toward a more personality-driven culture. Vance points to the Affordable Care Act as an example, a policy intended as a landmark reform that instead became a long-running source of political division. He also contends that, instead of bringing unity, Obama's tenure helped set the stage for the populist backlash that continues to influence American politics today.
The only thing the far left really responds to is power. The thing that they're actually going to be responsive to is the recognition that there are consequences on the other side. If they get off scot-free, if they're never investigated, if they're never prosecuted when they violated the law, then they're just going to come back and do the exact same thing again. There are a few different ways, of course. So it's the big tech companies that were censoring conservatives. They've got to know that's not going to be allowed. And
Patrick Bet-David digs into what he describes as Obama's focus on building a legacy, arguing that many presidential decisions seemed more aimed at shaping his public image than directly addressing problems. From highly polished photographs to carefully staged interviews, Bet-David says the presidency often felt more like a scripted production than a results-driven administration. The irony, he notes, is that in trying so hard to cement a place in history, Obama's record appears thinner when measured purely by tangible progress.
she sounds like the way MAGA feels with Trump when he talks about Epstein. How upset they are at Trump about Epstein. The Democrats are upset at Obama because they're saying you're doing this. They're putting the responsibility on him, right? On the messaging here. Adam, your thoughts on this when you see, what Whoopi, Obama...
JD Vance turns the focus to foreign policy, pointing to moments like the Red Line in Syria and the handling of Libya as examples of missed opportunities and unclear strategy. Vance argues that these choices left allies uncertain and gave adversaries room to maneuver, suggesting that the gap between strong rhetoric and decisive action had long-term consequences. In his view, the global stage saw a president cautious about projecting strength, and that caution contributed to a more unstable environment that persists today. Bet-David also critiques what he calls the cultural presidency, the playlists, celebrity appearances, and late-night comedy segments that became a hallmark of Obama's image. While these moments made him relatable and popular in certain circles, Bet-David questions whether they distracted from the core responsibilities of the office. He emphasizes that popularity and performance are not the same, and by the metric of measurable results, the record appears less impressive. Vance adds that for all of Obama's talk about empathy and inclusion, his approach often resonated most with an audience already inclined to support him, leaving others feeling disconnected.
Visually, he's changed. I like to say visually as opposed to from the look standpoint, because of course looks don't matter anymore in politics. Looks don't matter. Doesn't make any difference, right? Because we want to be politically correct, but they do matter. But he's changed. His look has changed actually quite a bit. I haven't seen him in a long time.
And by the way, Rob, I think that's even 4 years ago. I think it's even more than it is
Well,
today.
no, but the statement you just made was a couple of days ago. And
it was a couple of days ago. And it's similar to the statement he made back in 2012 when he told business owners, you didn't build that. Remember when he said that? I don't know if you remember that whole comment. I think this is the speech, Rob, if you want to play this.
You got a business. You didn't build that. Somebody else made that happen.
This becomes a pattern.
On the economy, Bet-David challenges the idea that Obama presided over a strong recovery, describing it instead as one of the slowest rebounds in modern history. Wage growth was modest, job creation lagged, and national debt increased significantly. While media coverage often framed it as a success, many working Americans didn't feel the improvement in their day-to-day lives. Vance builds on this point by highlighting what he sees as a contradiction. Obama frequently called for unity and a less divisive politics. Yet the political climate at the end of his tenure was more polarized than when he began.
How many guys saw the recent movie Leave the World Behind? Anybody saw that movie there? Oh, okay. Yeah, all these... Am I watching a movie or is this a documentary realistic thing? And then I'm seeing Mark Zuckerberg just spent $100 million building a house in Hawaii with a nuclear bunker. What does he know that the rest of the world doesn't know about? Talk about the timing. Oh, coincidentally, a week after that movie comes out, a new movie comes out. What's the name of that movie? Civil War. Leave the world behind. Our power grid in America hasn't been updated. 75% of it hasn't been updated in 50 years. And you're kind of talking about that. Then you're pitting whites against blacks. There's a line in the movie that says, Dad, if something goes down, we can't trust these white people. I know that's something both you and Mom agree on. Why do you put that line in the movie, Barack? And you were...
Patrick Bet-David zeroes in on the contrast between image and reality, portraying Obama as a skilled communicator whose true talent was in selling an idea rather than delivering measurable outcomes. In this view, his presidency was defined less by decisive leadership and more by branding, hope, change, and a carefully managed public persona. Once the spotlight dimmed, Bet-David argues, the substance behind that sales pitch appeared thin, leaving a legacy that feels more like a crafted narrative than a record of achievements.
Obama office responds to Trump's accusation of treason outrageous. Let me read this to you, and Thomas Ellsworth, I'm coming to you first, so please be prepared with all your notes.
Ready.
Obama's office spokesperson, Patrick Rodenbush, great first name, rejected the office of the Director of National Intelligence. Reports claim that senior Obama administration officials orchestrated the Russia collusion hoax, stating, out of respect for the office of the presidency, our office does not normally dignify the constant nonsense and misinformation flowing out of this White House.
Vance and Bet-David frame their critique not as simple political opposition, but as a challenge to a long-standing public perception. They contend that while Obama aspired to be remembered as a transformative leader, the results often didn't match the aspirations. The bipartisan unity he promised never materialized. The economy's recovery was sluggish for many working families, and political divisions deepened. For them, the presidency looked more like a long-running presentation than a sustained push for lasting reform, with style often overshadowing substance.
The one thing I wanted to show is the following. So you know how you talked about Jerome Powell, what an easy job. You come once a month and he said we're going to increase the rates.
Greatest job there.
I think this is the one thing they don't talk about. So Barack Obama got elected November 4th. Okay, quantitative easing started November 26th.
Right.
And it stayed for 8 years until you got elected.
Right.
So if you look at that low, pretty much 0% interest rate,
right,
and then you get elected, right, if you go to January 2016, Rob, for the audience to see that. And then from there, one by one, rates are going up. And then Biden comes in, goes back down to zero to try to save the economy. And then, you know, the rest is obviously history.
Right.
But do you think the average person knows, like, the impact of going to 0%? How much does that positively help the impact?
Bet-David also highlights what he describes as a pattern of cautious decision-making, saying Obama often seemed more like an observer than an active driver of change. On healthcare, his signature policy achievement, critics point to higher premiums and complex regulations as signs of a system that fell short of its promise. In foreign policy, he presented himself as a global conciliator, yet the outcomes, from Syria to Libya, sparked debate over whether diplomacy was paired with enough strategic follow-through. In Bet-David's telling, these examples reveal the limits of leadership built primarily on presentation.
I'm going to go to the next topic here, which is Adam's top topic, talking about Obama saying every man needs a gay friend. So Obama goes on his wife's podcast, okay? And they're sitting there having this conversation, and it opens, they covered a lot of different things. Right off the bat, they talked about the divorce. Hey, aren't we supposed to be getting a divorce and all this stuff? Just tell me if this seems like they woke up together in the same bed this morning, the last week.
Libya descended into chaos after Obama's intervention. Syria became a humanitarian disaster, and his much-publicized red line against Assad dissolved into diplomatic fog. His administration mastered the art of sounding decisive while remaining frozen in action, what Patrick Bet-David calls paralysis dressed as wisdom. JD Vance digs deeper, pointing out the hypocrisy of a president who campaigned on lifting working-class communities, yet spent his energy courting elite cultural circles, attending celebrity events, and cultivating media praise. Instead of using his influence to address the crises he left unresolved or to fight for struggling Americans, Obama transitioned seamlessly into the role of cultural celebrity. Post-White House, his priorities seemed more about Netflix deals, memoir tours, and carefully staged appearances than meaningful reform. Even his rhetoric on unity often deepened division, and transparency promises were overshadowed by scandals and stonewalling. And while I disagreed with nearly everything he did in office, I'll admit this much. For all his flaws, he carried a level of substance in his presence, something Kamala Harris sorely lacks.
The last point I want to make is, you know, I got to say, and shocker, newsflash here, I've defended Kamala Harris once, I'm about to defend Barack Obama once. So set to the side the hectoring and the tone of Obama when he went in and talking about black voters, like whatever. Obviously, I just criticized that. You know what I was watching him talk? You know what I thought to myself is, agree or disagree, and obviously I disagreed with about 99% of what he did when he was in office. He had substance, and Kamala Harris.
Netflix deals, memoir tours, and carefully staged public appearances became the signature of a man more invested in protecting his brand than leading a movement. The irony is sharp. The president who once warned against celebrity politics became its most successful practitioner, cashing in on the very stagecraft he once condemned. JD Vance calls out the gap between Obama's promises and results. Transparency morphed into scandals like the IRS targeting controversy and endless Benghazi stonewalling. Unity fractured into record polarization, and his talk of fairness ended in a Wall Street recovery that left working families behind. Far from healing divisions, Obama deepened them, soothing audiences with speeches while fueling the distrust simmering beneath the surface. Patrick Bet-David underscores how his rhetoric on economic justice was hollow, masking a presidency that elevated elites while leaving ordinary Americans behind.
The banks, the president is really preoccupied with this, and rightfully so. And of course, you've got to pay the lawfare back in kind. You've got to say to the Comeys and the Brennans of the world, of course, you got to follow the law. You can only prosecute people when they actually broke the law. But we know that a lot of people broke the law in the last administration, and they've got to face real justice. Not just words, not just getting hauled before a committee in Capitol Hill. If people broke...
The banks were rescued, the stock market soared, and the political elite thrived, but average households saw little change. Hope and change never reached the dinner table. Instead, the gap grew between the America Obama romanticized and the one struggling to survive paycheck to paycheck. JD Vance pulls no punches, arguing Obama was more focused on shaping his legacy than solving the crises left in his wake. A decade later, Obamacare remains polarizing, foreign policy blunders still linger, and the unity he promised has long since dissolved into deeper divides. Patrick Bet-David dismantles the myth of the transformational leader, showing how Obama's success was built on perception, not results. A presidency where applause was treated as proof of achievement, leaving behind not lasting change but lingering frustration.